Fed up in Zimbabwe, thousands of protesters demand President Robert Mugabe step down. Also on today's program, fears of lawlessness spread in Pakistan's largest province after a suicide attack kills 60 of its top lawyers. And in Picture This, balloons burst with color in the sky at Europe's largest hot air balloon festival. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Well, Zimbabwe has had the same leader for more than 35 years, and now many residents say time is up for President Robert Mugabe. The country's worsening economic crisis has propelled thousands to take to the streets, demanding change in the largest demonstrations in years. Now, opposition leaders have urged other parties to unite to defeat the president, including former members of his own administration. But supporters of Mugabe say the last thing the country needs now is more chaos, and that protesters should be patient with the government as it attempts to address their concerns. Today's newsmaker is Zimbabwe, as we ask if nationwide protests can topple Mugabe.
In Zimbabwe, anti-government pressure is mounting, and the signs are everywhere, on the streets and online. There's an unprecedented movement that's calling for President Robert Mugabe to end his 36-year reign. Despite growing opposition, the 93-year-old president is refusing to go.
I still have the energy and still have the life and the blessings of God. I'll continue.
But even if he does go, where will the country go from there? And will it be able to survive its biggest political and economic unrest in years? Zimbabwe's movement for democratic change remains the country's biggest opposition party, but discontent has spread beyond politics. President Mugabe's once loyal war veterans have condemned their commander's handling of the economy and their lack of pay.
We did not fight for the one center of power, and secondly, we did not fight for one family to benefit the economy of this country.
And it was this man, Pastor Evan Mawarire, who called on Zimbabweans to wave their country's flag as a symbol of defiance.
Begging for you to say something is begging for you to cry out and to say, why must we be in the situation that we are in, this flag?
The ruling ZANU-PF party is grappling with its own power battle over who could succeed Mugabe. One faction is linked to Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa, who's a former defense minister. The other supports Mugabe's wife Grace, who's acquired an increasingly political role. Critics say the infighting is only fueling instability. But Mugabe's supporters say the president should remain to steer the country out of its crisis. Zimbabwe's coffers are virtually empty. So is the job market and the pockets of university graduates.
There are no companies. Companies are closing. Instead of the promised jobs, the promised 2.2 million jobs. Actually, we lost 2.2 million jobs ever since that promise was made.
Hyperinflation, aggravated by months of drought, has crippled the country's economy, and millions of people are going hungry. The government wants to fix the cash crisis by issuing bond notes, but the plan is unpopular.
We don't want bond notes because they will wipe out the few US dollars we have left. They want to destroy the country. We do not want them.
But with Mugabe firmly in power, different policies are unlikely, though some predict that elections in 2018 might open a window for change. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from the UK is Alex Magaisa. He's a former advisor to opposition leader Morgan Tsvangarai and a lecturer at the University of Kent. And here in the studio with me is TRT World's Fidelis Mba. He has reported in the region and has been following this story very closely. Okay, we all are aware how historic these protests are, but I want to better gauge how much they genuinely reflect the will of a majority of Zimbabweans? Fidelis, let me start with you.
Well, it's actually true that the support base of President Mugabe has waned over, in the last few years, which even points to the fact that why there's actually a faction, among the ZANU-PF, his party, which is now divided between the wife and the vice president. So, and because of the economic crisis in the country, this amount of support he had over the years, which meant even if he said anything, no matter what, people from, the opposition said, people would never really listen to them. He would always have his way. But things are gradually changing. But that doesn't mean that he has lost base. Forget about, the campaigns, the protests in Bulawayo, the protests in Harare. Yes, people are getting more politically conscious and aware of what's happening to them and what lies ahead for them. And people are yearning for change. Okay. But it's not that easy to just dismiss, Mugabe, especially if they're able to close ranks within the ZANU-PF.
Okay. Alex, do you think we are finally seeing the end of Mugabe's rule here?
Well, as Fidelis has said, this is a very important development in the political debate in Zimbabwe. Mr. Mugabe has faced serious opposition from the movement for democratic change for a number of years, from organized politics. But this is the first time that we are seeing people who are previously sitting on the fence, previously apolitical, people in the middle classes coming together and saying enough is enough. The economic challenges that Zimbabwe is facing at the moment, which means many young people who are being churned out of the universities don't have any jobs. The government itself is broke. It is unable to pay its workers. And they are now introducing what they call bond notes, which is some form of currency, which people don't trust, especially after the years of hyperinflation 8 years ago. As he rightly says, there have been protests in the cities of Harare. The urban population, people are becoming more politically conscious and more active and less fearful of speaking out. But of course, we must also remember the demographics of Zimbabwe, that 67% of the population lives in the rural areas, where Mugabe has traditionally, been a very strong figure. And, this social or citizens movement, which is largely based on social media and bringing together the urban population, has to penetrate those rural areas if there's going to be any serious and significant change in the next few months.
Right. Alex, they are protesting against the government here, but not necessarily in support of any real opposition, because many would argue there really is no proper political alternative to Robert Mugabe's party, to ZANU-PF.
Well, there have been a lot of disappointments with the opposition political parties in Zimbabwe, especially in the last 3 years after the controversial election of 2013, when many people were very hopeful that the movement for democratic change and Mr. Tsvangarai would succeed. Unfortunately, I was part of that election campaign. Things didn't go according to plan. We believe that the election was stolen, that it was rigged. And what we are facing at the moment are the costs of that electoral theft. It is easy to dismiss the opposition, but I do think that the movement for democratic change is still a very credible and strong political party.
How so?
They've been growing.
I have to ask how so, because I know particularly the top members, including men like Arthur Mutambara, were fully co-opted by ZANU-PF. Nobody sees them as opposition now. They see them as part of Mugabe's party.
Well, I think there are various nuances to the opposition political parties in Zimbabwe. The main opposition political party is led by Mr. Tsvangarai. Mr. Mutambara was in another formation of the MDC. He has since moved out and is no longer active in the politics of Zimbabwe at the moment. I was going to say that President Mugabe split from one of his vice presidents, Mrs. Joyce Mujuru, who has now formed a political party, which at the weekend held a very symbolic joint rally with the movement for democratic change. And all this has galvanized the opposition and hopefully shows that there is potential for the opposition parties to look over their differences and work together in order to confront a common opponent.
Fidelis, I'm curious as to how you see the opposition. You mentioned Joyce Mujuru just there, but some Zimbabweans see her as still part of ZANU-PF, only a disaffected member because she didn't get what she wanted out of ZANU-PF. She was put on the sidelines in favor of Grace Mugabe. Where do you think that opposition stands?
Well, contrary to what he said, I feel the opposition is also divided, because before now it used to be just the movement for democratic change against the ZANU-PF. So they had a united opposition that was fighting Mugabe politically. Now you have Joyce Mujuru, who has been a minister since 1980. She's more than 60 years. Tsvangarai is more than 60 years. So to start with, they don't even represent the change that the young people are asking for. Because the young people, the middle class, the young graduates, they wouldn't be looking for someone who is already above 60 to come in now. Because one of the complaints is that Mugabe is too old. At 92, he's already old and he shouldn't be in power. Then would you want to bring someone who is also over 60? And then between both of them, who's going to step down for who? Morgan Tsvangarai wants to be president. Joyce wants to be president. That opposition, vote is already divided. Forget that, they had what looks like, a rally together. That is just, more like a political convenience for now. When it comes to the nitty-gritty of sharing positions, stepping down for people, you now discover that the opposition is not as united as people are, meaning to read into it. Because once Mugabe is able to settle the rift, within his party, you discover that the opposition might not be united enough to be able, even whether he is running or he decides to handpick someone else, it will still be a case of the ZANU-PF being the party to beat during the next general elections.
Alex, I wanted to get your take on Fidelis.
Well, I mean, with all due respect, look, we all understand. I engage with these people in Zimbabwe on a regular basis. I understand the point that Fidelis is making is a valid point. The opposition has been divided, and many of us who observe and engage with them have been encouraging and urging them to try and work together to form a coalition that would fight the common opponent. And the signs that we saw at the weekend, I don't think that it's fair to dismiss them as just convenience. I think it's the beginnings of a process of negotiating. Yes, it's going to be very difficult because they'll fight for positions, but they have to look at the bigger picture and to see that what they are looking for is a situation where they will be able to go over the challenge that we have at the moment, which is having ZANU-PF in power. And ZANU-PF, frankly, does not have any solutions to the challenges that the country is facing at the moment. So I'm hopeful. I do have my concerns, which I echo, about the opposition being divided. And we've been encouraging them to say, as Zimbabweans who are willing for democracy and for change, you need to get over your differences, get over the fascination with positions, and try and look at the bigger picture and serve Zimbabwe well.
But Alex, let me ask you where you think the protests themselves are headed now. We've seen the protest leader, Pastor Mamorire, almost disappear from the scene, some would argue. He's kind of moved on to the United States. He's said that he thinks his life may be in danger in Zimbabwe, and some of his supporters have said, we've just lost our leader, and they've expressed their disappointment to him directly. If he's not there to rally these people, particularly by the social media you both referred to, what happens to the protests themselves?
No, absolutely. What has happened in the last few days has been a very destabilizing factor for the citizens' movement. The challenge, of course, is that the citizens' movement was never an organized force. It was, people speaking out, and he did something incredible, which was to reawaken the spirits of the people, to make them more politically conscious, to allow them a voice to speak. But unfortunately, his abrupt departure to the U.S. has sort of deflated spirits among a lot of other people. But I'm also motivated by the fact that a lot of people who are looking at it are saying, look, this was never about one person. This is about citizens, and therefore, people must carry on with the momentum that has, been built over the past few months. It's going to be very difficult because, a lot of people who were very hopeful and looking to him as a leader will have been disappointed by what has happened. But, the question is whether or not they can look beyond this, get themselves up and try and chart a new way forward. My point has always been that you cannot build a movement around an individual. You have to institutionalize. Eventually, you have to work with the organized political parties and civil society, the likes of Mr. Tsvangarai, the likes of Mrs. Mujuru and others, get together despite previous differences in order to chart a way forward. So it's really a big test for the people of Zimbabwe that they can rise from the challenge that they've faced in the last few days.
I'd like to thank both of our guests for joining us on the Newsmakers. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Alex Magaisa from the UK, Fidelis here in the studio. Thanks so much. Still to come on the Newsmakers, residents in Quetta, Pakistan fear justice could be the greatest victim of a recent suicide bombing after the blast kills dozens of lawyers. And in Picture This, inflated anticipation is satisfied at Europe's largest hot air balloon festival. Last week, dozens of lawyers in Quetta, Pakistan were killed in a suicide attack on a hospital. It happened in a province already plagued by sectarian conflict and a separatist insurgency. And with growing corruption and mistrust of the local government, their deaths have left its people wondering who will protect them now. Gracie Jerome has more.
It's the latest chapter in Baluchistan's violent history. Close to 60 of the region's top lawyers wiped out in a suicide bomb attack. It happened as around 200 lawyers gathered at Quetta's main civil hospital to mourn the loss of a prominent barrister who was gunned down earlier that day, plunging Pakistan's biggest and most underdeveloped province into a deeper state of lawlessness.
Lawyers are honest citizens. They are the cream of the society. Who have they harmed? The president of our bar was killed. Our colleagues were killed. We remained silent. Today, a technical game was played with us.
While Pakistan mourns a generation of lawyers, the Bar Association has launched a boycott of the courts in protest. Both Daesh and a faction of the Pakistani Taliban have claimed responsibility for the attack. But for many, it's not a question of who carried out the attack, but why it wasn't prevented in the first place in an area so plagued by violence. Baluchistan has been marred in conflict between the government and separatists in Pakistan's so-called Dirty War. The province gained independence in 1947, but was annexed by Pakistan the following year. Since then, a separatist insurgency has been fueled by competition for the region's rich oil and gas reserves. And while the separatists wage their war against the military, terrorism is thriving. There have already been 15 deadly bombings in the province this year alone. With the hole in the justice system left by the latest attack in Quetta, hopes for an end to the violence are fading.
It's the incompetence of the government. That's why this Quetta incident occurred.
And the public is losing faith in the forces that are supposed to protect them. Pakistan's army chief, General Raheel Sharif, met with military leaders the day after the attack. After expressing solidarity with the victims' families, he ordered his military to intensify operations against insurgents. But just 3 days later, another attack in Quetta wounded 13 people. Authorities say police were the target of a roadside bomb, and that they'll intensify their fight against Baluchistan's growing insurgency.
I appeal to the government, for God's sake, try to put an end to these incidents.
But for the people of Baluchistan, it's another blow against their trust in state security. For them, it's not a matter of if there'll be another attack, but when. Gracie Jerome, The Newsmakers.
Well, Syed Ali Zafar joins me now from Lahore. He is the president of the Supreme Court Bar Association of Pakistan. Thank you so much for joining us. There have been various claims of responsibility for these attacks, all of which are still being investigated. But what I'd like to discern is whose interest is it in to kill these dozens of lawyers?
This is the most devastating, cruel, and horrific act you can imagine that has affected perhaps the entire country and the people, not just the people whose lives have been lost, but because the target in this case were the lawyers. And the lawyers have always stood for the rule of law. They've stood for enforcement of fundamental rights. They've been defenders and protectors of people's human rights. And we are considered to be the strongest bastion of civil society in the country. We've always stood on the forefront of this war against terror also. But we are also the softest targets possible. So what these terrorists who are neither animal nor human, what they have attacked is the intellectual community of the country. And that has had a devastating effect, as I've said, on the people, because by attacking us, they have managed to attack the justice system. They have tried to weaken.
I was going to ask you to please expand on that. Intellectually, what has been lost? What kind of intellectual capital has actually been wiped out now in the region?
The city of Quetta has had a very, very good crop of lawyers who had reached a certain level, intellectual level in practice. And the way that this was targeted, it was almost like a very operation, and the president of the bar there. And then when his body was being taken to the hospital, the tradition is that everybody who comes to know would go to the hospital, and that's what people did. Most of the senior lawyers, most of the good lawyers, they went to the hospital, and that's where this bomb was detonated. And as a result, 65 lawyers from the High Court and the Supreme Court of Pakistan who were practicing in Quetta were killed. That has had a very serious effect on the legal community there. And as a result, we have a vacuum. There's a huge gap now in terms of the professionals who are there. And we have now, in fact, devised ways and means of how to overcome this tragic loss. It'll take time, but what we have done is we have organized the younger lot of lawyers who were there. We've said that we'll send them out to different parts of the world to study, to get higher education. They will come to Lahore, and we'll try and get some lawyers to migrate to Quetta, so that we can fill up this huge vacuum that has been left behind.
So where is Baluchistan left now? Who is representing the justice system? Who's protecting human rights? Who's upholding the law?
We have, well, in Quetta, we have lawyers who are much younger now, because a lot of the cream of the people, the lawyers who were defending human rights and who were defending the rule of law have been killed. But yes, what we have decided is that the cases that they were doing will now be conducted by a number of lawyers from Lahore and Islamabad and Karachi and other parts of Pakistan, till we can reach a stage where there are counsels who can deal with those cases. You see, the aim that the legal community has decided is that we are not going to get weakened by this. We've resolved that we will win this war, we'll continue to fight. We had two options: either to say, you know, now that we've been attacked and we've got this loss, let us now stop and go back into our houses and stop the working and the profession. But that's not the decided all across the country. We had various meetings in all the associations, and we've decided to fight on and become stronger and make this into a turning point in this war against terror.
Okay, Syed Ali Zafar, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Well, in today's Picture This, Bristol's skyline in southwest England burst with color over the weekend as the city hosted Europe's largest ballooning event. Let's take a look. Today's newsmaker was Zimbabwe, as we asked if nationwide protests can topple President Robert Mugabe. The country's worsening economic crisis has propelled thousands to take to the streets demanding change in the largest demonstrations the nation has seen in years. Supporters of Mugabe say he still has vast support and that the country cannot afford any additional instability. But for critics of his more than 35-year leadership, there's only one solution to the country's woes. Mugabe must go. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.